So, I want to ask you guys two questions. What gives your life meaning, and what would your life's purpose be if you knew you were dying tomorrow? So, let's talk about it. I'm Brian, and welcome back. So, after a very long time, I devoted myself to start reading books, and the first two books that I read were Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl and When Breath Becomes Air by Paul Kalanithi. Well, this video is not a review about these two books, but rather a journey into the mind of two important people. So, first, let's begin with the story of Dr. Viktor Frankl. Viktor Emil Frankl was born on March 26, 1905, in Vienna, Austria. Now, even as a teenager, he was so into psychology and philosophy. So, he actually wrote to Sigmund Freud and he got involved with Alfred Adler before coming up with his own take on psychotherapy. Now, Victor studied in the University of Vienna, focusing on neurology and psychiatry. He even ran youth programs that helped reduce suicide rates among teenagers. When the Nazis came to power and annexed Austria in 1938, things got really tough for the Jews. Viktor Frankl was still working in Rothschild Hospital, the only hospital which was still hiring Jews at the time. And even though he had a visa to the US, he decided to stay back with his parents. And in 1942, Viktor Frankl, his wife Tilly, and his parents were captured and were sent to separate concentration camps. Now, this is where Viktor Frankl experienced a lot of pain, suffering, physically and psychologically. He was always at the brink of death, and eventually, after surviving the concentration camp, he found out that both his parents and his wife died in the concentration camp. Now, it was this experience that made him write this book. Next, we have the story of Dr. Paul Kalanithi. Paul was a brilliant neurosurgeon and a writer who had a deep love for both science and literature. He was born on April 1, 1977, and grew up in Arizona. Even though he started out studying English literature and human biology at Stanford, he eventually pulled toward medicine and went on to earn his medicine degree from the University of Yale. Paul specialized in neurosurgery and returned to Stanford for his residency. And just as he was about to finish his training and start a promising career, he was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer at an age of 36. Now, facing his own mortality, he began writing about his journey in a very incredibly honest way. He poured his thoughts into what would eventually become his book and memoir, When Breath Becomes Air. It was published after his death in 2015. Now, what's most powerful about both these stories is that both of these people were doctors who went through the same pain and suffering they once tried to save their patients from. And what is even more surprising is that both of their response to pain, death, and suffering is just the same. Now, this journey begins with the act of finding meaning from suffering. Now, Viktor Frankl in his book tells us that suffering by itself isn't meaningless. According to him, he witnessed people in camps that struggled to find a reason to live. What he's trying to emphasize here is that the word why is far more greater than the word how. In other words, if you understand why you're living, then it doesn't matter how you're going to live. If you find purpose to live your life, then your suffering itself has a meaning. For example, if you have someone to love, your family, your friends, siblings, then it means that you can endure almost any type of suffering because they become your purpose of living. To put it in other terms, this idea transforms pain into a challenge to find meaning. Dr. Paul Kalanithi's life and journey actually echoes Dr. Frankl's lessons. When Paul found out that he had cancer which was incurable, he could have just given in to fear, but he chose to live a life with purpose. He also wrote in his book, "Even if I'm dying, until I actually die, I am still living." He focused on his roles as a doctor, as a husband, and a father by doing what he actually loved, which was caring for others. Now, so far we talked about finding meaning in suffering. Now, let's talk about death itself. Both of these people confronted death face to face. Dr. Franklin wrote in his book that he saw his fellow prisoners die every single day. He himself was dying in the camp very slowly. Meanwhile, Dr. Kalanithi was just told that he had months left to live. Now, when death is near, everything changes, right? Then how do we live a life when life itself is at stake? Well, both of them had the same thing to say. When you're facing death, you will find out that what really matters in your life. But how do we actually face death? Dr. Kalanithi describes that when he found out that he was going to die, when he was in close contact with his own mortality, he told us that it changed nothing but everything. He knew that he would die someday before the diagnosis, but after the diagnosis, he knew exactly when he was going to die. But this changed him and this also helped him to focus in his life. He said after diagnosis, he dedicated fully to his wife, his unborn child, to caring to his patients and writing this book. His illness became a call to live, to love, to serve as a doctor and not let his suffering take over him. Again, I can't stress how much this action or these words are very much similar to what Dr. Frankl tells us in his book. Dr. Frankl was witnessing death around him and he realized even when every external freedom and comfort is stripped away, when a person is subjected to suffering, deprivation, and loss, there remains one freedom that cannot be taken away: the ability to choose how to respond internally to these circumstances. What he's trying to say was, even though we can't change what's happening around us, like getting sick or losing someone or suffering something which is unfair, we still have control over one thing. It is how we deal with this problem. When he was in the concentration camps, none of the prisoners had enough food to survive. But he still saw people doing something small and powerful, like comforting each other, sharing their last piece of bread, or staying hopeful that one day they will be free. To him, that proves something very important. Even when the outside world is a mess, we can still choose how we respond on the inside. Now, do you remember the two questions I asked you in the beginning of this video? The answer to those two questions are in the questions themselves. It's purpose. Both Dr. Frankl and Kalanithi remind us just one thing: it is purpose that gives us strength. And in the famous words of Dr. Frankl, if you have a why to live, then you can bear almost anyhow. It is meaning that carry us through our hardships. And Dr. Kalanithi found his reasons and meaning to live, which was the love for his unborn child Elizabeth, his wife, and the dedication to his patients. And in the final pages of his book, Dr. Kalanithi asks us a question that makes us think a lot. What makes human life meaningful even in the face of death and decay? And that question isn't just for someone who's suffering with cancer, but for each one of us to think about. And in conclusion, we are just left with the clear truth that meaning isn't something which is handed over to us. Meaning is created by us through the way we live and what we love. And I'm so damn glad after a long time I started reading books. And I'm lucky that I started with these two amazing books. So yeah, let me know if this video resonated with you, the thoughts on these videos resonated with you. And tell me which is your favorite book which changed the way you see life and the way you see things. So until then, take care and bye-bye.